All right, so this is the second page for the 2018 math portion sample test. So starting with question number 8, when x is 1/2, what is the value of 8 times x minus 3 divided by x? So we're going to replace x with 1/2. And my recommendation, honestly, is use a calculator at this point because computation will cause problems and it might save you a lot of time if you just use the calculator. But if for some reason you are not using a calculator, half of 8 is 4. 4 minus 3 is going to be 1, and you're going to divide that by 1/2. People do that incorrectly. People end up with 1/2 here, and this answer is really 2. What we're doing is we're taking one whole. Wow, that's an awesome circle. We are taking one whole and we are dividing it in half and saying how many halves are there. Well, there's actually 2 different halves. And so instead of getting 1/2, we get 2. You might want to use a calculator for that one again, even if you only use it for that last step. Okay, number 9, we have a couple endpoints and we want to find out what the midpoint is. The way you find the midpoint of a segment is you just average. You're going to average the x coordinates by adding them together and dividing by 2. And then you also want to average together the y coordinates by adding them up and dividing by 2. So when we add up the x coordinates, 3 plus 1, and divide them by 2, that will give me the x coordinate. 4 divided by 2 is 2. And actually, if I were rushing through this test and worried about time, you might notice that only option D has 2 as the x coordinate. That would be enough data for me to be able to move on. But if for some reason I felt like I really wanted to finish the problem, I could do 8 plus -4 divided by 2. So I'm adding up the y coordinates and dividing by 2. I get 4 divided by 2, which again is 2 for the y coordinate. Number 10, we are looking at this graph, and it shows the fluctuation of water depths. So different depths of water added here. And this is looking at the different times of the day, so it's changing with the tide. And we want to be able to find the difference. The operation for difference is subtracting, so we're going to be subtracting some values between the greatest water depth. Well, the deepest this water ever is 12 feet deep. And the least water depth. Well, the smallest amount of water depth that we ever have is right here at 6. 12 take away 6 is 6. And so the difference between the different depths is option G, which is 6. Number 11, we're looking at slope. Slope is rise over run. It is the change in the y values divided by the change in the x values. And you just want to be careful to make sure that whichever point you start with on the numerator, you start with that same point on the denominator. Quite commonly, people will call the first ordered pair x1, y1, and the second ordered pair x2, y2. So if we follow that common practice, then we would have on the numerator -5 minus 1, and on the denominator 2 minus -2. Be careful there. Computation just kills people right here. Be careful or use a calculator. We'll get -6, sorry about that, divided by 4 when you add the opposite. That fraction can be reduced. Notice it's a negative. I'm just going to completely take away the positive answer so I don't automatically choose the wrong one. And when I reduce that, I get -3/2, which is option D. Up to question 12. So for question number 12, we're looking at the fines for speeding. It's $17 for each mile per hour that the driver is traveling over the speed limit. So that $17 keeps getting reassigned over and over again the faster you go. Kirk was fined $221 for speeding on a road with a posted speed of 30 miles per hour. And we want to figure out what was his actual speed that he was driving at. Well, this $221, where that came from is it came from the $17 for every single mile that he was traveling over the speed limit. I'm going to divide that by 17 to find out how many extra miles per hour he was going over the speed limit. He was going 13 miles per hour extra above the speed limit. The speed limit was at 30. So if I add those two together, I can find out how fast he was going when he got that ticket, and that's a steep price, and I am glad I don't live in Cherokee County. Okay, number 13, we want to find the sum of the solutions. So in other words, what we want to do is we want to find out what x equals, and then we want to find out what y equals, and then I want to add those two values together. So looking at the first equation, 8x is equal to 12. If I divide that, and you can certainly use a calculator at this point and convert this to a decimal, that's going to be 1.5. I'm going to also need to solve this second equation here for y, so I will do inverse operations, and I will cancel that 10 by subtracting 10 from both sides. And then I'll divide both sides by 2 to find out that y is 6. And again, what I'm trying to do here is I am trying to find out what the sum of these solutions are. So I need to take these two answers and add them together. Turns out the sum is 7.5. Option B, it's written as a fraction, but it still is that same answer of 7.5. Number 14. So we have 5 scores, and we don't actually know what exactly that average is. However, we know that whatever the average is, it is the same as the median. Now we can draw all sorts of conclusions about that, but I'm going to keep reading. I also want to bring your attention to the fact that there are 5 scores. They are distinct as well, which tells you that none of the scores are the same values. They're all different. Okay. The sum of the 5 scores is 420. Now, here's why that's helpful. The way you find the average is you add up all of the scores and then divide by the number of scores that you have. So since we know that the sum of the scores is 420, and we also know that there were 5 scores, that's enough information for us to know what the average is, which is 84. Because the average and the median are the same, both the average and the median have a value of 84. So keep that in mind. What we want to find now is what the 4 scores would add up to if we removed the score that's not the median, or removed the value that's not the median. Now keep in mind, again, we already know that they have a total of 420. All they want us to do is remove the median from that total, and that would tell us what the other 4 scores are. So if I subtract that off, and you can use a calculator to help you with that, there's a remaining value of 336, which is option H. Number 15. Your calculator, by the way, can do number 15. If you are not really sure how your calculator can do number 15, see one of your math teachers. See a math teacher, and we can show you where the buttons are in your calculator that do absolute value. But in terms of just conceptually, how do you actually solve the problem without the calculator and understand it? Keep in mind, anytime you see absolute value is distance from 0. And absolute value is always a positive value. Now, you might then take that positive value and need to multiply it by a negative, which we'll see sometimes, but the absolute value is a positive value. When you're looking at all these grouping symbols in a problem, you want to start with the ones that are on the inside. So we're actually going to take care of these 2 items first. You're going to want to combine these values together and then take the absolute value of them. So I have the absolute value of -4 minus the absolute value of -6, and then I have closing up those absolute values. I'm just going to continue by simplifying these 2 expressions. The absolute value of -4 is +4 because -4 is 4 units away from 0. Then I have this minus sign. Do not try to cancel this minus sign with this one. When you have parentheses, you can go ahead and do that, but with absolute values, you can't actually cancel those. You can't add the opposite with that. You really have to finish processing the absolute value first. So I'm just going to focus in on this absolute value. The absolute value of -6 is +6 because that's how far away -6 is from 0. Remember, this minus was nothing to do with the absolute value. That was just recording from the step above. I'm now going to go ahead and finish simplifying inside the absolute value symbol, 4 take away 6 is -2. So I want to do the absolute value of -2. The absolute value of -2 is 2. So the answer is D. One thing you could do in this problem is if you notice at the very beginning of the problem that the entire expression is being taken the absolute value of, then you can already reject A and B. It is not going to be A and B because those were negative values. And when we're taking the absolute value, we will end up with a positive answer at the end. All right, number 16, our last one on this page. We want to find out which of these expressions is equivalent to x over 2/3, or x to the power, pardon me, of 2/3. So when you're looking at an expression and the power is a fraction, a rational power, the number on the top tells you a power that the expression is being taken to. The number on the denominator tells you the root that expression is being taken to, like a square root or a cube root. You can remember it because, like for any plant, roots are on the bottom. Same type of thing in here is that the root is on the denominator here. It's at the bottom of that fraction. So another way to write this is x is being squared, and we are also cube rooting this expression. So this 3 needs to be the index, or kind of written inside that radical symbol. It's not any one of those. This one does have a radical symbol for h, but it doesn't have the right index. This one has the right index, but is missing that power of 2, so only k has both of those pieces. And that is the end of page 25 for this video. And again, if for some reason you needed page 24, that is a separate video, as is each page in this ACT review.